Hey, how you doing, guys? This is Saf Buxy, and as always, TJ in the studio with us, and we are Universal Recovery. And welcome for another week, and welcome back, TJ. Welcome back.
Thank you, Saf. It was, it's been 2 weeks, and in some ways, it feels like it was no time at all. But I'm, of course, grateful to be here on the show with you.
Well, we missed you last week. A lot of people are asking, even though we had a reasonably decent, what should I say, replacement. A good friend of mine called Tanya, who popped in, and she was amazing. But obviously, there's only one TJ, ladies and gentlemen. There's only one TJ, and we're happy to have you back. But yeah, this is Universal Recovery. We're a show that talks about trauma, addiction, mental health connection, all different things, but mainly related to addiction. And TJ Woodward is a mastermind and a creator of a wonderful program, a wonderful concept that is called conscious recovery, and we will be talking about that as the weeks go ahead. But TJ, how was it like? You were actually doing some conscious recovery work last week, hence you couldn't make it, right?
Yes, I was in Fresno doing some trainings with clinicians at a treatment program called My Time Recovery, and they are incredible. The day one of the training, I was just blown away at the depth and the willingness for the clinicians. So what I do, my primary focus right now is certifying treatment programs in the conscious recovery method. And I go into the programs and do a 2-day training with the staff. And it was just a magical experience. I definitely am grateful for the shift that's happening in our treatment paradigm.
That's brilliant. And just to reiterate, conscious recovery, it's not an instead of, it's an in addition to other modalities. So we encourage you, and TJ definitely encourages you to, whatever works, but please try out conscious recovery. And it's something that I'm learning as much as possible about. It's a modality that it makes sense, TJ. It makes sense, and it's the way you've put it together, and the structure of it, and what you bring out in clients from using it. I mean, I've had some profound experiences just learning it. I mean, especially and I don't want to say too much, but especially when the adult self is talking to the child self at a moment of trauma. And I broke down when I did it. I absolutely broke down. That was powerful, man.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I know we're going to talk more about this today, but there are so many different layers and facets to addiction. And I think we're moving beyond the one size fits all. And so conscious recovery is one offering, if you will. And the essential premise that you're talking about here is that, in my experience, we can spend 20 years in talk therapy talking about the patterns, connecting the dots, looking at the causes of our addiction, learning new behaviors and new strategies. Conscious recovery comes in and says, until we get down to the actual deeper root causes and start to heal that part of ourselves that feels wounded. And in my experience, most often that is early childhood trauma. Quite often it is, I'll say it that way. And getting in and actually healing that is where we start to shift our addiction in a very, very different way than, learning relapse prevention tools, or, being able to find some new strategies for, substituting something more healthy than addiction. And I think all of that's really useful, but conscious recovery is offering a deeper approach.
I think it's finding something else that I guess would give you the same kind of dopamine rush as substance addiction or behavioral addiction. But can you really get the same kind of dopamine rush from meditation, for example, or from going for a walk, or doing some exercise, as say, and Angel says yes straight away. Angel, our regular, she goes, yes, you can. It's more of a question I'm putting out there as opposed to me believing it. But obviously, cocaine addicts and crystal meth addicts and alcoholics, you get a certain kind of rush. Can you get that same kind of rush?
Well, I mean, I'll say Yes, and that may not really be what we're wanting to do completely in recovery. It is an aspect. But if we're just moving from the dopamine rush we're getting from drugs and alcohol and trying to replace that dopamine rush, which with something that we consider to be healthier, we're not really getting down to what it is about us that we're craving that dopamine rush. So to be clear, of course, I think exercise and meditation and all the different tools where we do experience that, those are really wonderful. And that's the key here, Saf, that you pointed to. Conscious recovery is not saying this or that. And a lot of us have been trained to think, well, it's either this or that. So these natural dopamine rushes are incredible. And we want to also explore what is it within me that wants to seek that kind of experience. And maybe it's just a different way of looking at recovery.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally agree with you there, TJ, because it's not about the dopamine rush. Is why are we going for that as opposed to that?
Yeah.
And then when we go for that, why are we staying with that? Do you know what I mean? Which is consequential, which has got problems with it, with financial, health, relationships, criminal justice. Why do we keep on going to that? And when there are other things that we could go to, more healthier. I love it when you say more healthier choices, more healthier things to go to. Now, look, off air we were talking about the brain disease model. When I first came into recovery, as you know, and as the viewers know, that I started with the 12-step modality, the 12-step program, and I did that through one of the fellowships. And in early recovery, it was great. It was the best thing that I think that I could have found at that time, and that's how it happened. If I knew about conscious recovery, I may have looked at that. Maybe it wasn't around when. I don't know, but either way, 12 steps was introduced to me in early rehab, and it was a big part of my life. But they really do say it's a disease, it's an illness, it's we're sick. We should treat it like a physical illness. What are your thoughts on that, TJ?
Multi-layered question and multi-layered answer. So I want to start by saying what we really want to approach this with. The intention for me is, again, not to look at it's either this or it's that. So I like to look at everything in life through the lens of the 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And if you want help remembering that, it's pies. And I love this because I used to call it PIMS. I used the word mental. And then a client actually said, what if it's pies? And it's like each part of you is a piece of a pie. And I love that, right? So absolutely, there are issues with the brain that's being studied now. But here's the key to this. If I think that's the only issue, I just have a disease, because when I got sober, and like you, I got sober in 12-step, and I'm eternally grateful. And 12 steps has saved millions of lives, and it's become a worldwide movement that is really has shifted the way we view addiction. Because before AA and the 12 steps, it was considered a moral deficiency, right? And so there was a lot of shame and there was a lot of secrecy, which is exactly why it's anonymous, right? Because it was so taboo to even, people were put into mental institutions getting shock treatment. So thank you, 12-step, for this huge paradigm shift that happened in 1935. And now we're recognizing that there are different layers to it, right? There are intellectual issues, there are emotional issues, and there are spiritual issues. And when I got sober, basically, I was told, don't worry about any of that. You have a disease, period. You have a lifelong chronic illness that can never be healed, only treated on a daily basis. And so I accepted that in the beginning. And then I started to question that, like, wait a minute. If I'm viewing that as I have this lifelong illness that can never be healed, what is that creating in my life? So we're looking at a new paradigm where we're looking at some new possibilities with that.
Yeah, and it's so, because I was so, and I want to be respectful when I say this, but I sort of was bought into that. I bought into that way of thinking, and on one way, it helped my relationships with my family,
Yeah.
because they believed it as well, because that's what I believe, that's the way I was brought in. And in one way, it made things easier. And I think also in another way, we're not going to get down to the insurance side of things and the medical insurance kind of things, because if they perceive it as an illness, then you can get insurance for treatment centers and stuff. And I guess there's some of that goes in as well. Once you start, you can't stop, right? That's the big thing they say in 12 steps. Once I start, I can't stop, hence it's an illness, right? Now, you and I and many others around the world have shown that we can stop, but we've stopped without starting. If what they say is right, and we're not saying it's right or wrong, we're not, if what they say is 100% right, if you and I were to start today, would we be able to stop?
Well, and the answer is I don't know, right? And so I wanted to kind of pull out a little bit on the conversation, because let's say it is a disease. We're now recognizing that the way we treat a lot of diseases is changing, because with cancer, with all different types of what we consider to be a disease, we are recognizing now that we need to get down to actually the causes, because the Western medical model has been, what are your symptoms? How do we get rid of them? And traditionally, in the West, we've gotten rid of them through medication. Now, there are other kinds of treatment, but we've primarily focused in the physical room. And now, huge organizations, the medical establishment, if you will, is starting to say, whoa, there's more here than just the physical. They're starting to look at, the power of meditation, the power of mindfulness, mindset. I mean, the placebo effect in itself is a recognition that there's more going on than just the physical. So even if you do consider addiction a disease, we're going to look at it through a new lens. Now, I think it's always this and, as I said. So when we create a belief that it's only a disease and that's the only issue, because I have heard people speak and talk about their addiction, and they give this whole litany of the deep trauma they had and the disconnection and the shame they endured. And then in the end, they say, well, that's not why I drank, though. I drank because I had a disease. And my mind would be blown, because it's like, yeah, even if it is a disease, let's imagine that it is. You just said you told this story about how you had so much trauma and disconnection and shame, and then you drank to relieve that. And then you say, but that's not why I drank. I drank because I'm an alcoholic. So there are many more layers to this conversation than just simplifying it. And like you, it was so helpful in the beginning, because I had so much shame, and to say, oh my gosh, it's a disease I have. I can really let go of all this guilt and shame. But then there was a point when I realized that model isn't really helping me heal. It's only helping me treat.
Yeah, and I think about it all the time, because when as I got into adult life, TJ, when I did start, I didn't stop when others could stop or would stop. I carried on doing it, and then the more I reflect back, could it not just because my tolerance levels were better? Could it not just be that because I drank and took drugs from a very early age, by the time I got to 20, 25, 30, 35, that my tolerance levels were better and I could drink more, I could take more drugs because I've been doing it most of my life? Isn't that the reason why you stop? You can't stop because you want to get that buzz again, the initial buzz that you got?
Well, I mean, through the physical room, yes, absolutely. But if it were just that, first of all, there would be no treatment centers and there would be no support groups, because if it were just the physical, right, because we talk about chemical hooks in certain drugs, if it were just that, then we would only have detoxes, right? 72-hour medical detox, we'd get that out of your system and you would be fine. You would be better, right? So then one might say, well, then, yeah, but I have this disease, so that doesn't really heal it. That just gets it out of my system. And again, I'm going to say yes, and let's look at the emotional and spiritual aspects of what is creating this craving. I heard someone once say addiction is the great ache that is trying to be soothed. And I love that. It's my friend Felicia. I haven't seen her in years, but I loved when I heard her say that. because that was it, right? There was something deep within me that felt so broken, so damaged, so disconnected. And of course, I found relief through drugs and alcohol, and I wanted more. And of course, there was probably a physical hook, but I didn't drink every day. So I wasn't physically addicted to drugs and alcohol. I mean, there was a physical aspect, but for me, and I'm just speaking for me, it was really more spiritual and emotional. I felt broken. I felt damaged. Whoa, this makes me feel better. I feel empty, and that's that spiritual piece. I'm disconnected from my true nature, and I'm finding relief in this substance. I become addicted to it if I don't heal what's longing. It's like this longing for more. And that's why I have a little bit of an issue when we say, well, let's find a healthier dopamine rush, because, you know, people get addicted to that as well without actually getting down and healing the actual craving, not the physical craving, but that spiritual yearning.
Yeah, I totally relate to you, because I turned to drink and drugs because I was going through something that was very hard for anyone to get through, and drink and drugs was, brought a lot of relief to me. Got a few messages here. Angel's,
Right.
as always, very, very busy with this, and thank you, Angel. Keep it coming. Powerful, real talk. Balance the mind, working on inner work. Still, there are people treated by electro. I have a sister. I tried to stop doing that. She gets more trauma. I can't speak on that. Medication puts loads of stress in the body and restlessness just to calm the energy. It's sad. All chakras are blocked. Repair spiritual wounds, attachments. Someone's saying that I'm working very hard to save life. I don't know who you are, so please say your name, because I can't tell on this. Longing to feel our energy, freedom from all else. And that's the last message there from Angel, which is so great to have you on, Angel, as always. And Kimberly, you're not here today, or maybe that was you who said that, but keep your messages coming. Keep your messages coming, of course. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the four lenses.
Yeah.
Remind me of the four agreements, which you always mention. Don Miguel Ruiz, is that who it is?
Yes.
Don Miguel. It's quite funny, Don Miguel. Have you met him yourself?
I have met him, yes.
Oh, you have. It's because I had Dr. Marisa Pay on my show last week. She's interviewed you, hasn't she?
Oh yeah, she's. I mean, Marissa, if you're watching right now, I love you. I mean, there are unique individuals, and then there's Marissa. She's in a class of her own. I've had so much fun with her. Now we're living in the same area, so we're gonna like hang out and do some meditating on the beach. And she is a bundle of energy in the best possible way.
She's amazing, and she's also interviewed Don Miguel as well, I believe. But what goes for? I've just got a publisher for my book.
Congratulations.
And it's the same publisher who published one of Don Miguel's books. So it's just amazing, isn't it? So, but yeah, so he talks about the four agreements, and you talk about the four lenses. Are there similarities there?
Well, what I love about the four agreements is what he's presented is some really powerful and simple spiritual truths. The four agreements is one of the best-selling spiritual books of all time. And the reason I think it's so incredible is that it offers something really simple that our minds can grasp. So in that way, because I think sometimes spirituality is like, whoa, I just read this chapter, but let me go back and read it 3 or 4 times. And what I love about the way he wrote the four agreements is, here are these 4 simple and powerful spiritual principles that when lived will change your life. And that's what we're all really wanting, right? We're wanting a life with more love, more connection, more happiness, more purpose. So in that way, the 4 rooms or the 4 lenses, what is similar about it is it's simple and my mind can grab onto it. Oh, it's not just the physical. Oh, it's not just my thoughts. It's not just my emotions. It's not just my spiritual life. It's actually integrating all of them. And when we look at, one of the conversations I want to have is neuroplasticity and how we actually can change our brain now. So even in the physical room, we're starting to recognize that the spiritual and the intellectual and the emotional have an impact. In other words, we're not a box with 4 sides. We're not a house with 4 rooms. We're a complete being. But most of us hang out in 1 or 2 of those rooms more than the other ones. And that's where it can be out of balance. I tend to not live as much in the physical room. So for me, it's important to cultivate some of that. But really, it's about integrating all four of those and having some balance.
That's so beautiful, and the way you put that as well, looking at things in four different lenses. And whilst you're talking, I'm always relating it to my journey,
Yeah.
and the physical came later. The physical side of things actually, again, back to the tolerance levels and the habit, the habitual, and turning to, that came later. But it was all about the trauma, the spiritual, the emotional. I think if that wasn't marred, or if that wasn't disrupted, or if that wasn't in jeopardy in any way, maybe I wouldn't have turned to drink and drugs. But we don't know. We don't know. Angel said, it's Shahida Zorjwal. She's my mother-in-law from India. She's TJ. Say hi to my mother-in-law. She's in India.
Hello.
Hi, mummy. Sorry. Hi. Thank you for joining. She's joining us from India, so it's quite late there. So thank you for joining us. Angel says, I know how we are guided for everyone's need. Then she goes, oh yes, very interesting. Some are too much in the bubble too. So thank you. Keep your messages. So do you want to talk about neuroplasticity? Have we got enough time for that?
And so, of course. And just let's name that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. And you're all very, very fortunate.
I'm not either.
Not my skill set. And what we understand about neuroplasticity now is that we actually change the brain. And what the science is showing us. So I'll start with what we hear it most often said, and then I want to give my sort of spin on it or my take on it. We're recognizing that repetitive behavior creates new neural pathways in the brain. And I've been playing with that idea for 30 years because I remember in the 80s, gosh, that might be more than 30 years ago. Math, it's like a long time ago. Let's put it that way.
It's late 30.
Yeah, let's say that. So, but a long time ago, I was taught that getting the term getting stuck in a groove was about a repetitive behavior that created a groove in your brain. And that groove we get stuck in an automatic or unconscious way. So, for example, if you imagine brushing your teeth, most of us don't think, oh, I need to pick up the toothbrush now. Oh, I need to put on the toothpaste. It becomes automatic because we do it repetitively over and over and over again. And that creates a deep groove in the brain that we now are talking about more, which is this neuroplasticity and these neural pathways. Now, I want to take it a little further because, yes, behavior creates a neural pathway. And the behavior, for example, of an addiction creates a neural pathway. And then it becomes like our natural way of being is to drink or to use. But there's also a deeper, I think, way to look at this. And that is the emotions and the spirituality or our spiritual room also create neural pathways. So if we say, I have a brain disease, that's it. It can't be healed. It can only be treated. Well, wait a minute. We can create new neural pathways and literally change the brain. I think we're now recognizing that even genetics are changing. We know they change over time because through generational trauma, we're creating new genes, literally new genes that we pass down to our children. So, whoa. Let's look at the possibilities there. If it's true that I can change my brain, what are the infinite possibilities there? So if I'm holding a certain frequency, for example, I'm broken, I'm damaged, there's something wrong with me. We create that groove in our brain and we literally start to change the brain into a broken brain. That's exciting because if I can do that, then I can also do the opposite of that, create new neural pathways with infinite possibilities. So I'm very excited about this conversation because it's bringing science and spirituality together.
It really is. And while you talk about it, for some reason, not because me and Tanya, as I mentioned earlier, we always talk about cellular memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what your knowledge on that is, but I saw one of your programs whilst I'm studying the conscious recovery, and I feel so grateful to doing that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. There was one part where you mentioned, and I think it was at the beginning, where some of your clients come to you. This might be slightly a bit off, but it might be connected. Come to you and they say, "Oh, I've never suffered any trauma."
Right. Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people believe that. I mean, I remember when I first got sober, I said I had the perfect childhood, and now I laugh. And ultimately, globally, pulling that out, I did have the perfect childhood because it brought me all the lessons that I needed to be sitting here with you, having this incredible conversation, right? And when I hear people say I didn't have any trauma, I think we need to look at what does trauma mean? Because of course, a car accident, the loss of a parent, sexual and physical abuse, of course, those are trauma. And there's all these other aspects of trauma too. And I look at trauma, you've read Conscious Recovery. So, in the chapter on trauma, I talk about the 4 rooms. So again, because we focus mostly on the physical in our society, we focus mostly on physical trauma, and there's intellectual trauma, there's emotional trauma, and there's spiritual trauma. And spiritual trauma is very, very simple. And this is where I think all of us can relate to this. If I wasn't told by every person in my life, you're a whole and perfect spiritual being just the way you are, then that to me is trauma. It's funny. I don't know if you've watched the documentary about Mr. Rogers, but he got some pushback in the, I guess, 60s and I guess it was 70s, when he was teaching children that they were perfect just the way they are. The media kind of went after him because if you're telling them that they're perfect just the way they are they going to strive to be more? So then, isn't that interesting, right? So there's a lot of different things that we might not have considered trauma that, in my experience, actually are.
Well, there's a client of yours that came to you, and they said they've never experienced trauma, and then and you explored that with him, not straight away. I think it was the 3rd or 4th session that you spoke to him about it, and he mentioned something about his father beating his mother.
Yeah.
So he goes, "That wasn't my trauma. That was her trauma." And and I know, and you rightly say, well, at that age, because he was a young kid, it's going to affect him in some way. Okay, and it was kept somewhere. So he did suffer trauma. Trauma comes in different ways, especially at a young age like that. And then you started exploring that with him, and it was a profound experience again.
Yeah, because like you said, the cellular memory. I love what Gabor Mate says about trauma. He says, trauma is not a memory, it's a reaction, right? So like so this client, I believe the one you're talking about, actually said, I don't have trauma. And then he remembered being under his dining room table at 3 years old and watching his father pull a knife on his mother. Yeah. And he didn't identify that as trauma because it wasn't directed toward him. And when we did some of the deeper inner child work, he remembers the sensation of being 3 and how terrified he was. So he froze, right? It's usually fight, flight, or freeze. And his was freeze, to the point where he had frozen that memory and didn't even remember that. And of course, as we started to explore that and unravel that a bit, he was able to recognize how terrifying that was for his 3-year-old on so many levels. And it wasn't just a mental, because even if we got to the point where he said, oh, that was trauma, of course that was trauma. Connecting that dot is only the beginning, not the end of that story. So we want to go back and realize that trauma gets trapped in the body. That's why when we sometimes have deep tissue work, all of a sudden we'll have an emotion or even a memory. He was able to get down and realize there's still that part of him that's very afraid. And the way it showed up for him, it's going to show up differently for people, was his fear of conflict and, his relationship with his girlfriend. If anything seemed conflictual, he would retreat. So that's why it's a reaction, not a memory. He never connected the dots. Oh, I'm afraid to be in conflict with her because of something that happened when I was 3. So we started to explore that more deeply.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I saw that episode and I was like, it was just right there. So the neuroplasticity we're talking about, because we're all working a program, right? I think we all work as human beings. We're all working a program, a conscious program in many cases. But when we're working a conscious program, we're aware of this. We're working the program of our society. We're working the program of the way we've been brought up, our environment, and so forth. If we can change that, so I'm talking about people who may be brought up in the ghetto, surrounded by drugs, surrounded by crime, surrounded by all the things that, there's every chance that you're going to get into drinking drugs and have that lifestyle. And that's the program that they've been programmed in their mind. But that can be changed. That can be changed if we change our environment, if we change our thinking, if we change our way of doing things, because that's what we all used to. And I remember when I was growing up, TJ, and obviously I turned to drink and drugs because of the trauma and the abuse and everything that I went through. As I grew up to adult age, that's all I knew how to deal with things. I thought, whether it was a happy occasion, whether it was a sad occasion, whether it was a traumatic occasion, whether it was whatever it was, I turned to drink and drugs. But obviously in recovery, I turned to other things that are not drink and drugs. It was all about retraining and relearning. There's something you say. Is it unlearning? Is it
unlearning? Yeah.
Tell us about that. Tell us about unlearning what we already know.
Well, when I sat with the evolution of writing conscious recovery and creating it, I started looking at, so the root causes of addiction I've identified, right? And then what are the important steps in recovery? And it started with creating safety, not just externally, but internally. And then the next part for me is unlearning. And it's what are the beliefs, ideas, constructs, points of view that need to be questioned and unlearned. But we're also talking about it more deeply, which is a recognition that we're always choosing whether we realize it or not. And most of us, maybe we could say most of us most often are choosing unconsciously. We're not necessarily aware of why we're doing what we're doing or why we keep experiencing life in the same way. So here's a really simple example. One of the messages I heard growing up over and over and over again is there wasn't enough. So I looked around at my house and we had a 4-bedroom house. We had 2 cars. We were going to a great school. Why is there not enough? There was always, we can't afford that. I remember hearing that over and over and over again. We can't afford to go to that movie. And I knew that wasn't true, but that was a continual message I heard. So, and I want to just offer a little piece of something here, because sometimes people will say, gosh, are we just going to keep blaming everything on our childhood? It's not blame at all. It's recognizing that that was a message that I heard. And so I had this really deep core decision that somehow I either wasn't worthy of having stuff or there wasn't enough in the world. So that core decision needed to be unlearned for me. There was a point in my recovery that I did think everything was my parents' fault, right? First, I thought they were perfect. And then I thought everything was their fault. And then it came back to like, wait a minute, they were really doing the best they can. And these messages and these experiences had impact on me. And I was able to move from blame to accountability. And I don't mean they're accountable, but I recognized that all of that became something that became my point of view, that if I want to see my life moving in a different direction, I'm going to need to start unlearning some of these ideas.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Easier said than done. And so it starts with questioning every point of view. I think if I don't realize that I'm creating my reality based on my perspectives, it's going to be more difficult. It's not my perspectives. It's really happening. Look, here's reality. You know, in our country right now, in the US, there's so much focus on what's happening politically. I'm not going to talk about politics per se, but, you know, how I perceive what's happening creates what is happening for me, right? So we're all going to look at it differently. And so, in other words, it was, to take this back to trauma, it's less about what happened and more about the impact it had on me and some of the core ideas about myself I created from it.
And I've heard you say that before, and I've reflected back to a moment where I perceived to be going through something quite bad, and it wasn't so much what was happening, even though what was happening was not nice. Right. It was how it got me inside.
Yeah.
The word humiliation comes in. Everything the word humiliation comes so many times in my mind when I think about X, Y, and Z, when it was done in front of a lot of people in particular. The word humiliation comes in quite a bit. I'm talking 10, 11 years old. Well, we've got some messages here.
Right.
Through them quickly. We've got quite a few. Work on a cell level. I love all rooms for healing. Taking care of ourselves. We let go and renew ourselves. Thank you. Deleting DNA, past lives. Oh, yes. Even someone's body language can cause trauma for kids.
Oh, for sure. And one of the this is exciting. So thank you for the comment, whoever made that comment.
Oh, Angel's out.
Angel, thank you. So when I do the conscious recovery training with clinicians, we talk about what percentage of communication is verbal and which is nonverbal. And we know now that it's about 10 or 11% that's verbal. And most of us think the rest is body language, which a lot of it is. But for me, most of it is actually energy. And if you look at the 3-year-old, let's go back to the example of my client, who obviously will remain nameless. But when he was 3, what happened is the energy of, what was happening, what was unfolding in front of him with the knife being pulled on his mother, he went into a terror, right? And so it was more the energy of that. And then he put, my favorite word, concretized. He concretized that into his unconscious. And he wasn't necessarily conscious of it. But so, yes, so the energy, the body language, because I quickly realized that what people were saying, what people were doing, and the energy I was feeling were 3 totally different things. And I think the greatest impact is energy, because I remember thinking, this is what love is. This is what family is. Something felt, it was a felt sense of something felt off.
Well, I guess with coupled with that, I guess action as well. Different actions happening, the door slamming, standing up fast, throwing things across the road. You're not so much talking, even though it can be looked as some kind of communication. She goes on to say, TJ, a baby that don't get smile and love from mum or dad can be trauma.
Yes.
Attachments that like to drink can get you to like it if they have more into you in a past life. Someone saying, hey, I don't know who you are, please reveal yourself so we know who you are. Be good to say hi back. Inner work by the root, feelings behind the pain. Oh yes, energy. Leanne Naylor, hi Leanne, how you doing? Leanne says, agreed, energy playing a significant role. So we've got a lot of agreement regarding the energy, and that's good to hear, because people get lost in that sometimes. They don't see that as part of the thinking behind it. Energy can be moved to start believing in deeper stuff coming for surface in 2021. Thanks, Angel. Wow. Yeah. So energy is a big part, it seems, massive part.
Yeah, and for someone who maybe is watching that isn't, because sometimes people are like, well, energy, that sounds really out there. But even purely scientifically, we look at energy as a line, right? That's what creates. Actually, what creates something solid is energy, right? If you look at a table, we perceive it as solid, but it's actually whirling energy. And so that's one example. But let's go back to more of the, I guess, the psychological way we look at energy. A pre-verbal child, when we're new on planet Earth, our brains aren't even developed, so we're purely aware of energy. We're very much tuned into energy. That's why trauma in the first 5 years, it is believed, and by me as one person who believes this, that's the most significant. Not because what happened in those first 5 years is necessarily more significant, but we aren't as developed, so it has a greater impact on us. So I'll say it more simply, and Angel pointed to this. If we don't get love and connection from at least one caregiver, there's an energy to that, right? And we start to, that kind of trauma is cellular. It's not mental, because our brains weren't even developed yet. Wow. Right? Parents fighting, an energy of, I remember I had an uncle that, when he was in the room, I was afraid. He never said anything, but there was an energy about him that made me really afraid. And I remember feeling really guarded. It affected the way I saw men and sexuality. And there are layers to that conversation. But when we are pre-verbal, we're more in touch with energy. And as our brains develop And as we get taught certain things, many of us forget that that's really the way we actually communicate, and we're constantly doing it. Most of us, or many of us, let's say, aren't aware of the significance of that.
I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, TJ, but I was adopted at birth.
Yeah.
I was 2.5 months premature.
Hmm.
As soon as I was delivered, I was not held in my mother's hands, and I was put into an incubator.
Yeah.
As soon as I came out the incubator, I was already adopted, and I was with the adoptive family. With everything you've just said, is that trauma?
Significant trauma. And for those of us who are a certain age, that was really commonplace. Even I, I wasn't adopted, but even I was pulled away from my mother and put in an incubator for many days. And, again, this isn't about blaming our mother or blaming the system, but that has an incredible impact on us. We realize now that babies that don't get held die. They literally die, right? Physically. But for many of us, we emotionally shut off, spiritually shut off, because we didn't get that connection. I mean, just imagine the comfort of being in the womb. And there's also in vitro trauma, which we can talk about at another time. But there's this comfort, and then we come out into the world, and what we would really need at that moment to be really held and have a gradual, if you will, that transition into, this completely different existence. We're literally being fed in this beautiful cocoon, and then we're kind of thrown out into the world. And there are multiple layers to that. But when we're not held, when we're not seen, when we're not given the energy of love, there is what we call attachment wounds, which, of course, again, we could do a whole show on attachment, because I know Angel brought it up a couple times, and it's very important to talk about.
She has, and she's talked about attachment quite a bit. And now she says, I talk stuff, experience, and she's done a lot of inner work. Angel saying, Saf, thank you for sharing so much of yourself. I think it's important. I think it's important to share our experiences, because not only do myself and TJ in particular come from a academic and professional level, but we also have personal experience in it as well, so we can bring that to the party as well. Hi, Leanne. Right, Leanne's saying Joe Dispenza. Who, have you met him, TJ, or do you know Joe Dispenza?
But I do know. I obviously work.
I thought you were on the same platform with him. That maybe that's someone else I'm thinking of. But she says Joe Dispenza talks a lot about the here T being the center and emitting energy, which is linked to our emotional well-being. This then links in with the trauma and attachment, which can stem back to being in the womb. So yes, Saf, I believe that would have been a traumatic experience. Thank you. And she goes on to say generational trauma and parental wounds are also linked into this topic. And Angel says, I want to be in that program. Which program? If it's conscious recovery program, just give me a message or give TJ, and maybe she might he'll be able to possibly guide you and direct you to the right place. Oh, about attachments. So she wants to learn about attachments and stuff. So thank you. Thanks, guys. Well, look, we're coming to an end, TJ. This is, as always, it goes really quick. And we started talking about the brain disease model and attachments, as always, and connection and attachments always comes into this. And the reason behind that, because it's a massive, massive part of addiction, or shall we call it bonding, whichever way you want to call it. And it's all interlinked. And so good to have you back, TJ. It really was. It was. You hadn't been away. It was beautiful. And great topic again, a great show. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, there's nothing I love more than being in this conversation. And, going back to what you said about our personal journeys, everything I do is because of my own journey in trauma, suffering, disconnection, addiction, and then finding a way out through so much wisdom that's out there and in here. And so this platform is a place for us to explore that. And I'm really incredibly grateful.
Definitely. Thanks, TJ. Just a couple more messages before we go. Leanne says, love listening to these calls. Thanks, guys. Always, Leanne, we're always here every Tuesday. Angel, she wants to share how I work on attachments for 4 years. Well, Angel, if you want to come on the show next week for about 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes, let me know, and I'll send you the link privately, and you can come onto the show. We'd love to have you, because we hear you, we read you. but we'd love to hear you as well. So, of course, you're always welcome, Angel. Thank you. Thanks, guys. This has been another fantastic week of Universal Recovery. Check us out again next Tuesday, 6 p.m. UK time, and wherever you are, you can work it out from Google. I'm back again on Thursday with Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories. I have a musician actually. Have you heard of a band called the Brand New Heavies? TJ?
Yes, of course.
I've got the lead singer coming. One of the lead singers. Yeah. So she's on my show on Thursday. Celine Fleming, her name is, and she's also done work with Brian McFadden from Westlife. So, and next Tuesday it's back again. Myself and TJ Universal Recovery. Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure. TJ, any last words from you, sir?
If no one's told you today, you are a whole and perfect spiritual being. You know, that's what if someone asks me, do you have any closing words? I always close with that, because that's the ultimate reminder.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, guys. Till the next time.
Thank you.